A brand nobody in America had heard of managed to outsell Mercedes-Benz in its very first year on the market. Not its fifth year, not after a decade of slowly building credibility. Year one. The company behind it didn't even exist as a nameplate 12 months earlier. And here's the part that makes absolutely no sense until you understand what actually happened. It was built by Toyota. Yes, that Toyota, the Corolla company, the Camry company. The boring, reliable appliance on wheels that your parents trusted to get them to work every single morning without drama. You'd assume they built a luxury brand to chase prestige, to slap a fancier badge on something and charge more for it. That's not what happened. Toyota was trying to solve a very specific and very expensive problem. They were hemorrhaging their wealthiest customers to Germany the moment those customers could finally afford to leave. That one defensive move, that attempt to plug a leak in their own customer base, ended up humiliating luxury brands that had been around for over a century and completely rewrote what luxury even meant in the American market. This is how Toyota accidentally created Lexus, and why that accident changed the entire auto industry in ways nobody inside that company ever saw coming. So in 1983, the chairman of Toyota, a man named Eiji Toyoda, asked his engineers a deceptively simple question in a closed-door meeting. Could Toyota build a luxury car capable of going head-to-head with the best cars in the world? Not a slightly nicer Cressida with a few extra options bolted on. The best, full stop, with no compromises anywhere. Nobody in that room knew it yet, but that single question was about to set off one of the most secretive, most obsessive engineering projects in the entire history of the automobile industry. Toyota didn't announce a new luxury brand to the world. They didn't hold a press conference or tease a concept car at an auto show or leak details to journalists. Instead, they quietly assembled a small team of engineers and designers and gave the project a code name, F1, not Formula One, the racing series everyone assumes it refers to. F1 stood for Flagship 1. A select group was pulled off other projects and told almost nothing except this: build the best car in the world, and don't tell anyone what you're doing, not even other people inside Toyota. The secrecy went remarkably deep. Test mules were disguised so heavily with extra body panels and camouflage wrapping that competitors and journalists who happened to spot them on public roads had absolutely no idea what they were actually looking at. Toyota engineers flew prototypes all the way to Germany and tested them on the Autobahn at sustained high speeds that most Japanese cars of that era had genuinely never been pushed to before. They drove them through the brutal dry heat of Death Valley. They tested them in the bone-cracking cold of the American Midwest in the dead of winter. By the time development wrapped up, they had logged well over 1 million miles of real-world testing, all before a single paying customer had ever sat behind the wheel. The benchmark wasn't another Toyota or even another Japanese car. It was the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, widely considered at the time the finest car in the world, the absolute pinnacle of automotive engineering and luxury. Engineers bought multiple S-Class models outright, shipped them to Japan, and tore them apart piece by piece in a workshop, studying every single weld, every panel gap, every switch and stalk and button, asking a brutal question of every individual component. Can we build this better? Not as good. Better. More than 1,400 engineers and around 2,300 technicians worked on the project at its peak. Over 450 separate prototype vehicles were built, tested, and destroyed in the process. By the time it was all said and done, Toyota had spent well over $1 billion developing a single car before the company had even publicly decided what to call it. This wasn't a company trying to slap a fancier badge on an existing platform and quietly charge more for the privilege. This was Toyota treating the entire project like a ground-up reinvention, starting from a genuinely blank sheet of paper with the explicit stated goal of beating the best luxury manufacturers on earth at their own game, on their own turf, in their own backyard. The car that came out of Project F1 eventually needed a real name for the showroom floor. Toyota considered hundreds of candidates before settling on one that sounded refined, modern, and just slightly mysterious. They called it Lexus, and they built an entirely new brand around that single word, complete with its own dealerships, its own customer service philosophy, and its own identity, deliberately and carefully separated from Toyota's mass-market image. That's where this story gets really interesting, because before Lexus could prove itself out on the open road, it first had to prove itself in something far stranger: total, complete silence. This is where the accident in this story really shows itself most clearly. Toyota's original goal back in 1983 was genuinely modest in scope: keep wealthy, loyal Toyota customers from quietly defecting to German brands once they could finally afford to. That's it. That was the entire business case. Nobody inside Toyota's boardroom in 1983 was sitting there predicting they'd end up creating an entirely new category of automobile that simply didn't exist before. But that's exactly what happened anyway. Lexus proved conclusively that you could build a genuinely world-class luxury car without decades of European heritage behind the badge, without an emblem that screamed old money, and without the eye-watering price tag that had always come bundled together with that level of engineering precision. They created the modern idea of attainable luxury, a luxury car built and priced for successful, hard-working professionals rather than aristocrats and old industrial fortunes, and the rest of the industry simply had no choice but to respond, and quickly. Honda had already been quietly developing its own answer to this exact gap with Acura. Nissan followed almost immediately afterward with Infiniti. Within just a handful of years, the entire American luxury car landscape had been permanently reshaped, with Japanese manufacturers now occupying valuable showroom space that had once belonged exclusively to Europe and Detroit. Mercedes-Benz and BMW were forced to fundamentally rethink pricing, quality control, and customer service standards across their entire American operations, specifically because of the new standard Lexus had just set practically overnight. The luxury car buyer's baseline expectations had permanently shifted in a single product cycle, and there was simply no going back to the old way of doing business. Today, Lexus regularly ranks among the best-selling luxury brands in the entire United States, competing directly and confidently against the very same manufacturers Toyota's engineers once secretly tore apart piece by piece just to learn from them. The brand that began as a quiet defensive move to plug a hole in customer loyalty became one of the most respected luxury nameplates anywhere in the world. To understand why Lexus exists at all, you have to rewind the clock back to a much earlier failure, one that burned itself into Toyota's institutional memory so deeply that it shaped every single decision the company made for the next 3 decades. In 1957, Toyota tried to crack the American market for the very first time with a car called the Toyo Pet Crown. It was a complete disaster. The Crown had been engineered for Japanese roads, narrow streets, low speeds, short trips between cities. American highways absolutely tore it apart. The engine couldn't handle sustained high-speed driving for hours at a time. It overheated on long stretches of interstate. It struggled climbing hills that any domestic American sedan handled without even thinking twice about it. Toyota pulled the car from sale within a couple of years, embarrassed in front of the exact market it had spent years hoping to conquer. That failure didn't just sting, it scarred the company at a cultural level in a way that lasted for decades. Toyota's engineers walked away from that disaster obsessed with one idea: never again would they send a car to America that wasn't built for America, tested for America, and proven mile after grinding mile on American roads under American conditions. That obsession with quality, the thing Toyota would eventually become globally famous for, was born directly out of that early humiliation in the late 50s. By the early 1980s, that obsession had paid off in an absolutely massive way. Toyota had become the gold standard for reliability in the United States. The Camry, the Corolla, the Cressida, all of them had earned a reputation that German and American automakers simply couldn't match at the time. People trusted Toyota the way they trusted a good watch or a dependable refrigerator. It just worked, every single time, without excuses. But that trust created a strange and very expensive new problem, one that showed up over and over again in Toyota's internal market research. Their most loyal customers, the ones who bought a Corolla in their 20s, then upgraded to a Camry in their 30s, then moved up to a Cressida once their career started taking off, eventually hit a ceiling. Once they had real money, once they wanted a true luxury car with leather and status and a badge that said something about who they'd become, they didn't stay with Toyota, they left. They walked straight into a Mercedes-Benz dealership or a BMW showroom and never looked back. Toyota was spending 20 years building customer loyalty and trust, only to hand those exact customers straight over to Stuttgart and Munich the moment it mattered most financially. Every single one of those buyers represented 2 decades of trust and profit walking right out the door, and there was nothing Toyota could do to stop it, because they didn't have a product that could compete at that level. This wasn't about ego or hurt feelings. This was about cold, hard money, and Toyota's leadership understood that perfectly. Here's a detail that tells you everything about how far Toyota was willing to go on this project. When engineers were developing what would become the LS400, the very first Lexus, they became fixated on noise, not horsepower, not styling, not acceleration. Noise, or more specifically, the complete absence of it. They wanted the cabin to be silent in a way no production car had ever achieved before. So they built an anechoic chamber, a room specifically engineered to swallow sound completely, with no echoes and no reflections at all, and they tested the car inside it again and again, hunting down every single source of noise and vibration in the entire vehicle. Wind noise sneaking around the side mirrors, faint vibration traveling through the steering column, the barely audible hum of the climate control fan at low speed. Engineers chased sounds most human ears would never even consciously register because they wanted a kind of silence that customers would feel in their bones rather than hear with their ears. That same obsessive perfectionism showed up absolutely everywhere on the car. Toyota's engineers reportedly tested the LS400's V8 engine for over 1 million simulated miles on dynamometers before it ever touched a real road. They chilled the engine down to extreme low temperatures and then immediately ran it at full throttle just to find the exact breaking point and engineer that weakness out entirely. Every single panel gap on the car's body was measured and remeasured to a level of precision that more established century-old luxury brands simply hadn't bothered chasing at that level. And then there's the story that still gets told in business schools today. Shortly after the LS400 launched, Toyota discovered 2 extremely minor issues. Nothing dangerous, nothing that most manufacturers of the era would have even bothered disclosing. A cruise control wiring quirk and a small flaw in a brake light assembly. Instead of waiting around for complaints to trickle in, Toyota proactively contacted every single owner directly. In several documented cases, dealership technicians personally drove out to customers' homes, picked the car up, fixed the issue at the shop, washed and detailed the vehicle, topped off the gas tank, and returned it, all before the owner had even noticed anything was wrong in the first place. That single move became legendary inside the auto industry. It told the American luxury car buyer something no advertising campaign on earth could have communicated nearly as effectively. This brand cares more about you than the brands you already trust with your money. Toyota wasn't consciously trying to build a status symbol. They were trying to remove every conceivable reason for a customer to ever doubt them again. But what they were accidentally building, without fully realizing the scale of it yet, was a brand new definition of what luxury car ownership could actually feel like in America. On September 1, 1989, Lexus officially launched in the United States with 2 models, the flagship LS400 sedan and the smaller, more affordable ES250. The LS400 was the one that truly mattered, the one the entire billion-dollar project had been built around. It was priced at just over $35,000. For comparison, a comparable Mercedes-Benz S-Class cost nearly twice that amount. BMW's flagship 7 Series wasn't far behind either. Toyota had built a car that independent reviewers were openly comparing, and favorably, to the German establishment's very best, and they were selling it for almost half the price of the competition. Car and Driver magazine tested the brand new LS400 directly against the Mercedes 420 SEL and the BMW 735i. The Lexus didn't just hold its own. In multiple measured categories, it genuinely embarrassed them. It was quieter inside the cabin. It rode more smoothly over rough pavement. Its V8 engine produced more horsepower than Mercedes' own V8, while running with a level of mechanical refinement that stunned engineers who later tore it down piece by piece just to understand how it had been achieved. American luxury buyers, the exact group Toyota had been quietly losing for 2 decades, didn't quite know what to make of it at first. A Japanese luxury sedan felt almost like a contradiction in terms to people raised on European heritage and American chrome. But word of mouth moved fast, and so did Consumer Reports, which praised the car's build quality and long-term reliability in ways that simply weren't being said about its German rivals at the time. By the end of its very first full year on sale, Lexus had achieved something almost nobody in the industry saw coming. The LS400 alone outsold the legendary Mercedes-Benz S-Class right there in the United States. Lexus, as a young, barely known brand, quickly began closing in on and eventually overtaking established luxury nameplates that had decades, sometimes more than a century, of heritage and prestige behind them. Mercedes-Benz and BMW were caught completely off guard by all of this. Internal reports from German manufacturers in the early 90s described genuine institutional alarm spreading through their engineering departments. Teams of engineers were assigned to tear down Lexus models bolt by bolt just to understand how a company with zero luxury car heritage had managed to out-engineer them so thoroughly on their own home turf in their own specialty. Toyota hadn't set out to humiliate the German luxury establishment. They had set out quite narrowly to stop losing their own loyal customers to exactly those brands. But the scale of what they'd actually built went far, far beyond fixing a simple customer retention problem. They had built something that fundamentally rewrote the rules of the entire luxury car segment almost overnight. Toyota didn't set out to dethrone Mercedes-Benz. They didn't set out to invent the entire concept of attainable luxury or reshape the American car market. They set out very narrowly to stop watching their best customers walk straight out the door and into a German showroom. In trying to solve that one specific narrow problem with total obsessive commitment to doing it properly, they accidentally built something far, far bigger than anyone in that 1983 boardroom ever intended or predicted. Remember how this story started. A brand new car company outsold Mercedes-Benz and BMW in its very first year on sale, and it didn't even exist as a brand 12 months earlier. Now you know why that's not a coincidence, and it's definitely not luck either. It's the direct result of Toyota refusing to do anything halfway ever. A company that had been scarred by an early, very public American failure with the Toyopet crown spent 30 long years building a culture-wide obsession with quality so deep that when they finally pointed all of it at the luxury market, they didn't just compete with the establishment. They broke it wide open. The wildest part of this entire story is that Toyota never set out to build an icon. They set out to solve what was essentially a spreadsheet problem. Customer retention, plain and simple, and because they refused to cut a single corner anywhere along that journey, they accidentally created one of the most influential car brands of the last 50 years and forced the entire global luxury auto industry to completely rethink what their customers actually deserved. That's the story of how Toyota accidentally created Lexus, and honestly, it's one of my favorite happy accidents in all of automotive history. A company chasing down one small specific problem ended up reshaping an entire industry without ever really meaning to. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow more than you'd think. And drop a comment and let me know. Do you think Lexus has held on to that original obsession with perfection over the decades, or has it lost some of that edge along the way? I read every single comment, and I really do want to hear what you think. If you're new here, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next deep dive. We cover stories just like this one every single week. The moments where one decision in a boardroom or out on a factory floor ends up changing the cars we all drive, often in ways nobody could have predicted at the time.